At 15 years old, Noah Carter owned exactly $58. Until he spent 50 of them on a forgotten strip of land beside an old lake. Just a week earlier, his stepfather had thrown him out with nothing more than a backpack and the clothes he was wearing. No phone, no home, no family willing to take him in. For days, Noah drifted from one fishing dock to another, sleeping beneath abandoned boat shelters and doing odd jobs just to buy enough food for tomorrow. Most people in his situation would have saved every dollar. Some would have looked for a cheap room. Others would have left town entirely. Noah made a decision that nobody could understand. He bought a tiny piece of lakeside land that everyone else had ignored for years. There wasn't a house. There wasn't even a cabin. Only a few pine trees, a crumbling dock, and a narrow shoreline where locals insisted nothing good had happened in decades. When the county auction ended, laughter spread through the crowd. That kid just paid $50 for a swamp. He'll be back asking for a refund by next week. Even the fish abandoned that lake. Maybe they were right. For the next several days, Noah gathered fallen logs, scavenged scrap lumber, and built himself the smallest shelter he could manage. It wasn't much, just enough to stay dry when the rain came. For the first time since being thrown out, he had a place where no one could tell him to leave. Then, one quiet evening, while standing on the broken dock and watching the sunlight disappear beneath the water, he noticed something impossible. Far below the surface, resting perfectly still beneath years of crystal-clear water, was the outline of an old wooden boat. It hadn't drifted there. It hadn't broken apart. It looked as though someone had carefully lowered it to the bottom on purpose. The next morning, Noah borrowed a rope and decided to pull the forgotten boat back to the surface. He had no idea that hidden inside it was something that had been waiting for decades, or that one discovery would uncover a promise an entire community had almost forgotten. But before we dive into today's story, I'd love to know where you're listening from and what time it is where you are right now. It's always amazing to see people from all around the world gathering here to enjoy these stories together. If it's morning where you are, I hope you have a peaceful, productive, and wonderful day ahead. If you're listening tonight, get comfortable, relax, and enjoy the journey. If you love stories about forgotten places, hidden histories, and ordinary people who discover extraordinary acts of kindness, leave a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel so you won't miss our next story. Now, let's go back to the afternoon when a 15-year-old boy, abandoned with only $58 to his name, spent 50 of them on a forgotten lakeside property and spotted a sunken boat that was never meant to be found. Noah Carter stood on the front porch with a faded backpack at his feet while the screen door slammed shut behind him. The sound echoed through the quiet afternoon, followed by the sharp click of a lock. He waited, hoping his stepfather might open the door again after his anger cooled. Instead, the living room curtain moved slightly before closing completely. Noah looked down at the backpack that held everything he owned: 2 shirts, an old sleeping bag, a pocket knife his grandfather had once given him, and an envelope containing $58 he had earned mowing lawns during the summer. At 15 years old, he suddenly had nowhere to go. He walked until the neighborhood disappeared behind rows of pine trees and quiet country roads. That night, he slept beneath an abandoned fishing dock, listening to waves lap gently against weathered wooden posts. The lake was peaceful, but the cold air kept him awake. Over the next several days, Noah survived by doing small jobs wherever he could find them. He carried supplies for fishermen, swept floors inside a bait shop, stacked firewood behind a lakeside cafe, and helped an elderly couple clean their garden. Every dollar mattered. He spent as little as possible, buying only bread, canned soup, and bottled water. Each evening he searched for another sheltered place to sleep along the shoreline. Despite everything, he never stopped looking across the lake. The water gave him a strange sense of calm. One morning, while reading notices posted outside the county office, Noah spotted a flyer announcing a public auction for abandoned tax parcels. Most properties were small, unwanted pieces of land with unpaid taxes. One photograph caught his attention. It showed a narrow strip of shoreline surrounded by tall pine trees. A broken dock stretched into clear water. No house stood on the land, only the remains of a collapsed shed hidden beneath vines. The minimum bid was $50. Noah folded the flyer and spent the next day thinking about it. $50 would leave him with only $8. If he kept the money, he could buy food for another week. But he would still have no place where he truly belonged. The following afternoon, he joined farmers, investors, and curious neighbors outside the county courthouse. One property after another was sold, until the auctioneer lifted the photograph of the Lakeside parcel. "Old shoreline lot," he announced. "No utilities, no structures considered livable. Opening bid, $50. Silence followed. Someone laughed quietly. "That place floods every spring." Another man shook his head. "You couldn't build anything useful there." Noah swallowed hard and raised his hand. $50. The auctioneer looked around for another bid. None came. The gavel struck the wooden podium. "Sold!" Several people chuckled as Noah stepped forward to sign the paperwork. One woman whispered, "Poor kid just bought himself a patch of weeds." Noah accepted the folded deed without answering. By late afternoon, he reached the property carrying his backpack over one shoulder. The shoreline looked even quieter than the photograph. Tall pine trees surrounded the clearing, and the old dock leaned slightly over the water, its boards gray with age. The collapsed shed offered little usable lumber, but Noah carefully gathered straight boards and loose nails that could still serve a purpose. During the next few days, he worked from sunrise until dark. Using fallen branches, salvaged wood, and a blue tarp someone at the marina had thrown away, he built a simple lean-to against 2 sturdy pine trees. It was far from comfortable, but it kept the wind off his sleeping bag and gave him a place no one else could claim. On the 6th evening, after finishing a small cooking fire, Noah walked onto the broken dock as the setting sun painted the lake with orange light. The water was unusually still, allowing him to see several feet beneath the surface. As he looked down, something long and dark rested on the lake bed near the end of the dock. At first, he thought it was another fallen log. Then the fading sunlight caught the curved outline of a wooden bow. Noah leaned farther over the railing, his heartbeat quickening. Beneath the clear water, perfectly preserved beneath years of silence, lay an old wooden boat. Noah remained on the old dock until the last light faded from the lake, unable to take his eyes off the wooden boat resting beneath the clear water. It sat upright on the lake bed, as though someone had lowered it there with care instead of losing it in a storm. The following morning, before sunrise, he searched the shoreline for anything that might help him pull it free. Behind the collapsed shed, he found an old length of rope that was weathered but still strong. He tied one end around his waist and waded into the icy water. The lake was deeper than it looked. After several attempts, he reached the boat, brushing years of soft lake moss from its worn wooden side. It was surprisingly well preserved. He looped the rope around the bow and struggled back toward shore, but the boat refused to move. Noah leaned with all his weight until the rope dug painfully into his hands. The boat shifted only an inch before settling back into the mud. Breathing hard, he sat on the dock, wondering if he should simply leave it where it had rested for so many years. A quiet voice interrupted his thoughts. "You'll never pull that alone." Noah turned to see an elderly man standing beside the dock, carrying a tackle box and fishing rod. His weathered face was lined from decades beneath the sun. "Name's Walter Hayes," the man said with a friendly smile. "I fish this lake every Tuesday." Noah introduced himself and explained how he had bought the shoreline property only days earlier. Walter looked into the clear water and slowly nodded. "Haven't seen that old boat in a long time." Noah looked surprised. "You knew it was down there?" Walter rested his fishing rod against a tree. "People talked about it years ago. Nobody ever bothered bringing it up." Without another word, Walter walked back to his pickup truck and returned carrying a heavier tow rope and an old hand winch. Together they fastened the stronger rope around the boat, while Walter anchored the winch to a sturdy pine tree overlooking the dock. The work took most of the morning. They tightened the cable a little at a time until the mud beneath the boat finally released its grip. Water rushed around the wooden hull as it slowly rose toward the surface for the first time in decades. When the boat finally slid onto the rocky shore, Noah stood quietly beside it. Time had darkened the wood, but the shape remained solid. It had been built with care. Walter gently brushed away wet leaves from one of the seats. "Someone loved this boat," he murmured. As Noah inspected the inside, his boot struck something hidden beneath the rear bench. Reaching inside, he pulled free a small metal box wrapped in cracked rubber seals. Unlike the wood surrounding it, the box showed almost no rust. Walter examined it closely. Waterproof. The lid resisted at first before opening with a soft pop. Inside lay a leather-bound journal sealed inside waxed cloth, a tarnished brass key tied to a short cord, and 3 yellowed envelopes carefully bundled with faded blue string. Everything inside remained dry. Noah stared at the contents in disbelief. Whoever had prepared the box had expected it to stay underwater for many years. Walter nodded slowly. "Open the journal." Noah unfolded the protective cloth and carefully lifted the worn leather cover. The first page carried a neat signature written in dark ink. Thomas Reed. Beneath the name appeared a short handwritten message addressed to whoever might one day discover the boat. Noah turned the page. Only one sentence had been written across the top in larger letters than the rest. He read it aloud, almost in a whisper. "If you found this boat, the lake still has guardians." Walter's expression changed instantly. He looked across the quiet water as though remembering someone he had not seen in many years. While Noah realized the forgotten boat had carried far more than old wood beneath the lake's surface. Noah barely slept that night. The leather journal rested inside his backpack, beside the brass key and the bundle of unopened letters. Yet his thoughts kept returning to the sentence written across the first page. "If you found this boat, the lake still has guardians." At sunrise, Walter Hayes stopped by the shoreline carrying 2 cups of hot coffee and a paper bag filled with biscuits from the town bakery. Noah thanked him, grateful for the unexpected kindness. Walter sat on the old dock for a long moment before speaking. "If you want to understand Thomas Reed, there's someone you should meet." "Who?" Noah asked. "Lily Morgan. She works at the county archives. If anyone knows the history of this lake, it's her." Later that morning, Noah carefully wrapped the journal inside a clean towel and walked into town. The county archive occupied several quiet rooms inside the basement of the courthouse. Shelves filled with maps, ledgers, newspapers, and land records lined the walls. Behind a wooden desk sat Lily Morgan, who looked up with a friendly smile as Noah entered. He explained how he had bought the Lakeside parcel, found the submerged boat, and recovered the waterproof box. When he placed the journal on her desk, her expression immediately grew serious. She opened the cover carefully, reading Thomas Reed's name before turning several pages. The entries described routine days on the lake, repairing docks, checking weather conditions, helping fishermen whose engines failed, and rowing through storms to rescue stranded families. Every page reflected quiet service rather than adventure. Lily smiled softly. "I've heard stories about Thomas Reed since I was a child." She walked toward a filing cabinet and returned with several historical newspapers. One clipping showed a younger Thomas standing beside a rescue boat after helping pull 2 children from icy water decades earlier. Another article thanked volunteers who maintained emergency shelters along the shoreline without accepting payment. Noah compared the articles with the journal. "Everything matches." Lily nodded. "Mostly." She carried several property books to the table and began checking county records connected to the shoreline. After nearly half an hour, her brow slowly furrowed. "This doesn't make sense." Noah leaned closer. "What is it?" Lily opened another registry. "Thomas repeatedly mentions the Lakeside Rescue Trust in his journal." She pointed toward one paragraph describing supplies purchased for volunteer rescue crews. "But I can't find any official record showing that trust ever existed." She searched additional index books, then older land files. References appeared here and there, small handwritten notes mentioning rescue stations, volunteer docks, and community shoreline agreements, but whenever the actual trust records should have appeared, entire sections were missing. "Someone removed them," Lily said quietly. Noah looked around the silent archive. "Can documents really disappear?" "Not by accident." Lily carefully compared registry numbers. "The filing sequence is broken. Pages that should be here simply aren't." She continued searching until she reached a dusty drawer containing miscellaneous historical correspondence. Tucked between 2 unrelated folders rested a folded carbon copy of an old document. The original signature page was missing, but the title remained perfectly readable across the top. Lakeside Rescue Trust. Lily unfolded the fragile paper with great care. "This isn't the complete agreement," she said. "It's only a duplicate copy." Noah studied the faded paragraphs describing volunteers, rescue boats, emergency shelters, and public access to the shoreline. The final page had been torn away long ago, leaving the document incomplete. Still, it was the first official proof that the organization mentioned throughout Thomas Reed's journal had truly existed. Lily looked from the copy to the journal resting beside it. "Your boat didn't just preserve someone's memories." She gently slid the duplicate trust document into a protective sleeve before handing it to Noah. "It preserved evidence." Noah carefully tucked the copy beside Thomas Reed's journal, realizing that the quiet shoreline where he had built a $50 shelter was becoming part of a story far older than he had ever imagined. Walter Hayes was already waiting beside the lakeside shelter when Noah returned from the county archive with Thomas Reed's journal and the fragile copy of the Lakeside Rescue Trust tucked inside his backpack. The old man had brought a small canvas tool bag, a coil of rope, and 2 pieces of scrap lumber he said might help brace the broken dock. Noah wanted to tell him everything at once, but Walter only nodded toward the lake. "Work first," he said. "Stories sit better after your hands have earned them." Together, they spent the morning replacing 2 cracked dock boards and pulling weeds from around the lean-to Noah had built between the pine trees. Walter worked slowly, but every movement had purpose. He showed Noah how to set nails at an angle so the boards held tighter, and how to test rotten wood before trusting his weight to it. For the first time since being kicked out, Noah felt what it was like to work beside someone who expected him to learn instead of fail. Around noon, they sat on the shore with bread, canned beans, and coffee. Walter had brought in a dented thermos. Noah finally opened the journal and showed him the copied trust document Lily Morgan had found. Walter held the pages carefully, his weathered thumb resting near Thomas Reed's name. "I knew Tommy," he said softly. "Most folks called him stubborn. I called him the only man on this lake who never asked what a rescue was worth before rowing out." Noah looked toward the old wooden boat drying on the shore. "He saved people." Walter gave a quiet laugh without much humor in it. "More than anyone counted. Fishermen, children, campers, drunk men who shouldn't have been near water, families caught in sudden weather. If someone waved from the lake, Thomas went. No bill, no lecture, just a blanket, a fire, and a way back to land." He pointed toward the broken shoreline beyond Noah's shelter. "There used to be a rescue shed here. Ropes, oars, lanterns, blankets, dry clothes. Volunteers kept it stocked. Thomas believed the lake belonged to everyone, so safety had to belong to everyone too." Noah listened closely, feeling the journal become less like an old book and more like a living voice. "Then why doesn't anyone talk about him now?" Walter's eyes moved across the water. "Because promises are easy to forget when the people who made them are gone. And some men prefer land without promises attached." Before Noah could ask what he meant, the sound of tires on gravel came from the narrow road above the lot. A black SUV rolled to a stop near the trees. A tall man in a clean gray jacket stepped out, looking around Noah's rough shelter, the repaired dock, and the raised boat with cool interest. "Noah Carter?" he asked. Noah stood. "Yes?" "Richard Dalton." The man offered a polished smile. "I own Dalton Lakeside Development. I heard a young buyer picked up this parcel at auction." Walter's face hardened, but he stayed silent. Richard glanced toward the lean-to. "You've done what you could with very little. But this shore is not a place for a boy to live." Noah felt his shoulders tighten. "I'm managing. For now," Richard said. He removed an envelope from inside his jacket. "I'll give you $5,000 for the land today. You paid $50, correct? That's a remarkable return." Noah stared at the envelope. $5,000 would mean food, clothes, maybe a real room somewhere. It would mean not waking every morning wondering if rain had soaked his blanket. But Richard's eyes were not on Noah's shelter. They kept drifting toward the old wooden boat pulled onto the stones. "Why do you want it?" Noah asked. Richard smiled again, thinner this time. "Future lake improvements, private docks, cabins, nothing you need to worry about." Walter set his cup down. This shore was never meant to be fenced off. Richard looked at him. "Times change, Walter. Water doesn't." The two men held each other's gaze long enough for Noah to understand they had history he had not yet heard. Richard turned back to him. "Think carefully. A strip of trees and mud will not protect you forever. Money will." Noah thought of the journal's first line, the copied trust paper, and Thomas Reed rowing into storms without asking payment. He also thought of the screen door locking behind him and the laughter at the auction when he bought what no one wanted. "I'm not selling," he said. Richard's smile disappeared for the first time. "Sentiment is expensive." "So is forgetting," Noah replied, surprising himself. Richard slipped the envelope away, then paused beside the raised boat. His voice lowered. "While cleaning up this property, did you happen to find anything inside that boat?" Noah did not answer, and Walter slowly stood beside him. Richard looked from one face to the other, then gave a small nod. "Be careful what you drag up from the bottom of a lake." He returned to his SUV and drove away, leaving Noah staring at the boat, certain now that Thomas Reed had hidden more than memories beneath the water. Noah kept Thomas Reed's journal wrapped inside his backpack for the rest of the day, even while he and Walter finished securing the boat above the shoreline. Richard Dalton's question followed him like a cold shadow. "Did you happen to find anything inside that boat?" By evening, Noah no longer believed the sunken boat had been forgotten by everyone. Someone had remembered it well enough to fear what it might still contain. The next morning, Walter drove him back into town to meet Lily Morgan at the county archive. She had already pulled several boxes from storage and spread old lake maps across a long table. "I started with the filing numbers from the trust copy," she said. "They should lead to harbor maintenance files, rescue agreements, and county shoreline records." Noah set the journal beside her carefully. "And do they?" Lily's mouth tightened. "They led to empty folders." She showed him 3 file jackets labeled with dates from the same years Thomas mentioned in his journal. Each one should have contained agreements about volunteer rescue access, dock maintenance, public safety equipment, and shoreline easements. Instead, the folders held only routing slips and faded tabs where documents had once been attached. Walter stood near the end of the table, arms folded. Thomas used to complain about papers disappearing. Lily looked up. "You remember that?" "I remember enough. He said a promise wasn't safe if the only copy sat in a courthouse drawer." Noah opened the journal to several marked entries. Thomas had written about repairing the rescue shed, replacing storm lanterns, and delivering copies of Lakeside Rescue Trust papers to the county clerk. He also mentioned a harbor file number that matched one of Lily's empty folders. Lily copied the number and disappeared into the back room. When she returned, she carried a brittle correspondence ledger. "This tracks incoming mail from decades ago," she said. "Not the documents themselves, just proof they arrived." She ran a finger down the page and stopped. "Here. Thomas Reed submitted trust renewal papers, dock maps, and rescue supply inventories. The clerk received them." Noah leaned closer. "So they existed?" "Yes," Lily said, "and someone later removed them." They spent hours comparing Thomas's journal with surviving county logs. The pattern became clearer. Files connected to public rescue use were missing. General tax records remained. Old survey maps survived, but several had handwritten notes scratched out near the lakeside parcel Noah had bought. One note, nearly erased, appeared to read, "Rescue shore access protected." Lily photographed it before closing the book. "The trust copy proves the organization existed," she said. "But we need the complete agreement or something that explains what the shoreline was legally meant to be." Walter rubbed his jaw, thinking, Thomas kept duplicates. He had to. He trusted people, but not cabinets. Noah remembered the brass key tied inside the waterproof box. Maybe the key opens something. Lily examined it closely. Not a door key, too small. Strong box, desk drawer, maybe a lockbox. Walter looked toward the lake through the archive window. Though the water was several streets away, there was an old harbor office near the north dock before Dalton's people tore most of that side down. Thomas used to meet volunteers there. Lily searched the archive index again. North Dock Harbor office records were transferred after a storm damaged the building. Most went into miscellaneous storage. She led them to a narrow room behind the archive where unclaimed municipal boxes sat stacked beneath canvas sheets. Dust rose as they searched through labels: fish licensing, dock repairs, marina taxes, storm cleanup. Near the bottom of one shelf, Noah found a thin metal drawer marked North Harbor Correspondence. Inside were yellowed notices, old permit requests, and a sealed envelope that had never been mailed. The handwriting matched Thomas Reed's journal. Lily set it on the table and opened it carefully with a paper knife. The letter was addressed to the county commissioner, but carried no stamp. Thomas wrote that the rescue shoreline was in danger of being reclassified as private development land because critical trust files had gone missing from the harbor record. He warned that if the public forgot the rescue trust, future owners could fence off the very shore where volunteers had saved lives. Noah felt his hands tighten as Lily read. Near the bottom, Thomas wrote that he had secured the full rescue account somewhere safer than any office drawer, along with original signatures, rescue logs, and maps proving the shoreline could not be closed to those in danger. Walter exhaled slowly. He knew. Lily turned to the final lines, her voice quieter now. If the trust is challenged and the harbor files are gone, search beneath the old dock. The truth rests with the rescue ledger. Sheriff Ben Foster arrived at Noah's Lakeside shelter just after sunrise, answering Lily Morgan's request to witness the search described in Thomas Reed's unfinished letter. Noah had met the sheriff only once before during the county auction, but Ben greeted him with quiet kindness instead of suspicion. After listening carefully while Lily explained the journal, the waterproof box, the missing harbor files, and the reference to the rescue ledger, Ben nodded thoughtfully. If Thomas hid official documents, we recover them the right way, he said. Walter Hayes led the group toward the old north dock that Thomas had mentioned years earlier. Most of the structure had collapsed long ago, leaving only weathered pilings rising from the shallow water. Thick reeds surrounded the shoreline, and broken timbers lay scattered beneath vines. This place used to be the rescue station, Walter said softly. Volunteers launched from here whenever storms rolled across the lake. Noah studied the worn planks beneath his feet while remembering the final sentence in Thomas's letter. Search beneath the old dock. The four of them began clearing years of debris. Ben removed loose boards while Walter cut away heavy vines with an old hatchet. Noah pulled driftwood aside as Lily compared the remaining dock layout with one of the faded harbor maps she had copied from the archive. After nearly an hour, Walter stopped near the center of the old dock and tapped a thick support beam with the handle of his tool. The sound echoed differently. Hear that? Noah knelt beside him and struck the boards gently with a piece of scrap wood. Most produced a solid thud, but one section answered with a hollow knock. Ben crouched beside the beam and brushed away packed dirt that had collected between the boards over decades. Hidden beneath mud and moss was a rusted iron ring almost invisible against the weathered wood. We found something, he said quietly. Working together, they pried up the heavy wooden hatch. Cool air drifted upward from a narrow storage chamber built beneath the dock. A short ladder descended into the darkness. Ben switched on his flashlight before climbing down first. Noah followed close behind, with Lily carrying protective document sleeves and Walter descending carefully behind them. The underground room was small but remarkably dry. Stone walls surrounded shelves once used to store ropes, lanterns, and emergency supplies. Most had rotted away, but one large iron strongbox remained against the far wall, coated with dust, yet untouched by moisture. Noah immediately recognized the size of the lock. He reached into his backpack and removed the tarnished brass key found inside the waterproof box aboard Thomas's boat. Without speaking, he inserted the key into the lock. It fit perfectly. A single turn released the mechanism with a quiet, metallic click. Ben lifted the heavy lid while everyone gathered around. Inside rested a thick leather ledger wrapped in oilcloth, several sealed document folders bearing county seals, and a rolled shoreline survey tied with blue ribbon. Lily carefully lifted the ledger first. Gold letters pressed into the worn cover read simply, "Rescue Ledger." She opened the first page and smiled with relief. Every entry listed volunteer rescue missions, emergency supply purchases, maintenance of public shelters, names of rescued families, and donations made to keep the lake safe. Beside nearly every annual record appeared signatures from local volunteers confirming the information. Walter gently touched one page. "There's Thomas." His finger rested beside the familiar signature they had already seen inside the journal. Beneath the ledger lay the original Lakeside Rescue Trust Agreement, complete with official county recording seals and handwritten signatures. Lily unfolded the first pages carefully, while Ben compared the seal with photographs he had taken from surviving county records. "These are authentic," he said. Noah watched as Lily reached the central legal section. She paused before reading it aloud. "The shoreline, rescue dock, emergency shelters, and public access surrounding this trust shall remain permanently available for community rescue purposes and shall never be transferred into private ownership or closed for commercial development." Silence filled the underground chamber. Noah looked toward Walter, who closed his eyes for a brief moment before smiling sadly. The missing documents had survived exactly as Thomas Reed intended. Everything Richard Dalton wanted to purchase had been legally protected all along. Noah stood beneath the old North Dock, with the open strongbox at his feet, staring at the original Lakeside Rescue Trust Agreement while the words Lily had read seemed to echo against the stone walls. The shoreline, rescue dock, emergency shelters, and public access were never supposed to be sold, closed, or turned into private property. For a moment, the small strip of land he had bought for $50 no longer felt like a lucky mistake or a desperate shelter. It felt like the last surviving piece of a promise Thomas Reed had hidden where only someone willing to care about the lake might find it. Sheriff Ben Foster carefully photographed every document before sliding them into protective sleeves. Lily labeled each folder by date and source, her hands steady but her eyes bright with excitement. Walter Hayes remained beside the old ledger, turning pages slowly as if greeting names he had thought were gone forever. "There they are," he whispered, pointing to a list of volunteers who had maintained the rescue station. "My brother, Thomas, old Maynard Cole. Half the lake used to help." Noah leaned closer. The rescue ledger recorded storm nights, broken boats, missing children, capsized canoes, supplies bought with donations, blankets left in the shelter, lanterns replaced, and dockboards repaired. Page after page proved that Thomas Reed had not worked alone. The lake itself had once had guardians, just as the first journal page had said. By afternoon, Ben secured the original documents at the sheriff's office, while Lily made certified copies for the county archive. Noah returned to the shoreline with Walter, both of them quiet during the ride back. The old wooden boat still rested near the water, drying beneath the pine trees. Noah ran his hand along the curved bow and thought of Thomas sinking it deliberately, trusting the lake to hide what people might destroy. Why would he put the first box in the boat and the rest under the dock? Noah asked. Walter looked across the water. Because the boat would draw the right person in. The dock would tell them what the boat meant. That evening, as Noah repaired a loose tarp on his shelter, a small group of townspeople came down the road carrying photographs, old newspaper clippings, and memories awakened by Lily's questions. One woman brought a picture of her father wrapped in a blanket outside the rescue shed after being pulled from the lake during a spring storm. A retired teacher remembered Thomas rowing across rough water to bring back two boys who had drifted too far from shore. Another man produced a cracked lantern marked with the initials L.R.T., saying his grandfather had kept it after the rescue station closed. Walter identified several faces and places, confirming what the ledger already showed. Noah listened, surprised by how quickly the empty shore began filling with voices from the past. Yet the comfort did not last. Near dusk, Richard Dalton's black SUV rolled down the gravel road again. This time he stepped out without the smooth smile he had worn before. He looked first at the old boat, then at the group gathered near Noah's shelter. "Quite a gathering," he said. Sheriff Ben had not yet returned, and Noah felt suddenly young beside the man's polished confidence. Lily, however, had come back with copies of the documents and stood straight beside Walter. Richard's eyes narrowed when he saw the folders in her arms. "You found something." "Enough," Lily said. "The trust was real." Richard's jaw tightened. "Old papers don't change present ownership." Walter answered before Noah could. "They changed the lie that got called ownership." Richard ignored him and turned to Noah. "You still have time to walk away. Whatever these people are filling your head with, they will go home to warm houses when this turns into courtrooms and bills. You'll be the one left here with nothing." The words struck too close to the fear Noah carried every night under his tarp. But then he looked at the people standing around him, the photographs in their hands, the rescued faces, the old lantern, the dock Thomas had protected. "I already know what nothing feels like," Noah said quietly. "This isn't it." Richard stared at him, then gave Lily a cold look. "Publish anything reckless, and my attorneys will respond." "Then they can read the ledger too," she replied. Richard left without another offer, his tires throwing gravel as he drove away. When the sound faded, Walter rested a hand on Noah's shoulder. "Thomas would have liked you." Noah looked down, unsure what to say. Later, while helping Lily sort through the copies near the shelter fire, Noah opened the waterproof box from the sunken boat one more time. Beneath the folded waxed cloth where the journal had rested, he felt a thin seam in the lining. He pulled carefully, and a narrow envelope slipped free, sealed with brittle wax and addressed in Thomas Reed's careful handwriting, "To the one who brings the boat back." Lily Morgan's article appeared in the county paper 2 mornings later, carrying a photograph of the raised wooden boat beside the headline, "The Lake That Once Had Guardians." Noah read it 3 times while sitting on the edge of the repaired dock, his bare feet hanging above the water that had hidden Thomas Reed's boat for so many years. Lily had written carefully, using the journal, the rescue ledger, the original trust agreement, and the witness statements without turning the story into gossip. She described Thomas as a volunteer boatman, the Lakeside shelter as a public rescue station, and the shoreline as land once protected for anyone in danger on the water. By noon, people began arriving. Some came because they had read the article. Others came because their parents or grandparents had once spoken of Thomas Reed and the rescue station in fragments they have never fully understood. An elderly woman brought a faded photograph of her brother standing beside Thomas after being rescued from a capsized fishing boat. A middle-aged man carried an old oar with LRT burned into the handle. 2 sisters came with a newspaper clipping about a winter rescue Lily had not yet found in the archive. Walter Hayes sat on a folding chair beneath the pine trees, identifying faces and places with growing emotion. "That was the South Cove storm," he said, pointing to one photograph. "Thomas rowed out twice that night." Noah listened as the shoreline filled with voices. Only weeks earlier, this place had been a patch of weeds people laughed at him for buying. Now, strangers stood where he had built his lean-to, speaking softly about fathers, brothers, children, and neighbors who had made it home because someone once kept ropes, lanterns, blankets, and courage ready by the water. Sheriff Ben Foster arrived in the afternoon with certified copies of the trust documents and a notice from the county office. He told Noah, Lily, and Walter that the commissioners had reviewed the evidence enough to schedule a formal public hearing. They need testimony, records, and a chance for interested parties to respond, he said. But the trust agreement is strong. Noah looked toward the old north dock where the strong box had been found. What happens if they agree? Then the shoreline goes back to the trust, Ben said. The auction gets corrected, and the county decides how the rescue property is managed. Noah nodded, though his chest tightened at the thought. He had bought this land because he needed somewhere to sleep. Now the papers seemed to prove it was never supposed to belong to him at all. Walter noticed his silence. "You're not losing it, boy," he said gently. "You're helping it become what it was." Over the next several days, the shoreline changed faster than Noah expected. People brought lumber to reinforce the dock, dry blankets for the shelter, rope, lanterns, first aid supplies, and old stories that Lily wrote down in careful notebooks. Someone donated a canvas tarp, better than the one Noah had been using. A retired carpenter repaired the leaning frame of the old rescue shed foundation, enough to mark where it once stood. Children from the Lakeside school came with their teacher and helped clear brush from the path. For the first time since being kicked out, Noah worked among people who did not ask why he had nowhere else to go. They simply handed him tools, shared food, and treated him as if he belonged beside them. Lily published a follow-up piece with excerpts from the rescue ledger and photographs of the community returning supplies to the shore. The article ended with Thomas Reed's line from the journal. "If you found this boat, the lake still has guardians." That sentence spread through town. It appeared on notes left at the dock, on a handmade sign someone nailed to a pine tree, and in conversations Noah overheard at the bait shop. Richard Dalton responded through his company, calling the renewed attention emotionally compelling, but legally premature. Lily read the statement aloud near the shelter fire one evening, then folded the paper and tossed it into her bag. "That means he's worried," Walter said. "That means he has lawyers," Ben corrected when he arrived shortly after. "Which is why the hearing matters." Noah kept Thomas Reed's sealed envelope hidden inside his backpack, unopened. He wanted to know what Thomas had written to the one who brought the boat back. But Ben advised waiting until the public documents were presented. "The letter is personal," the sheriff said. "The trust has to stand on evidence first." Noah accepted that, though each night he touched the envelope through the fabric of his bag before sleeping under his improved shelter. On the evening before the hearing, the lake grew unusually still. The raised boat rested near shore, cleaned but not fully repaired, its old wood dark beneath the fading sky. The dock no longer sagged where volunteers had reinforced it, and the path to the old rescue station stood clear for the first time in years. Noah sat beside Walter as firelight flickered across the trees. "Do you think Thomas meant for someone like me to find it?" Noah asked. Walter looked at the water for a long time. "I think Thomas believed the lake would choose someone who needed saving badly enough to understand why saving others mattered." Across the lake, the county courthouse lights glowed faintly in the distance. By morning, the story hidden in a sunken boat would no longer belong to the water alone. It would be spoken in front of everyone. The county meeting hall was already crowded when Noah Carter arrived with Walter Haynes, Lily Morgan, and Sheriff Ben Foster. People stood along the walls holding old photographs, copied journal pages, and folded newspaper clippings from Lily's articles. At the front of the room, the commissioners had arranged certified copies of the Lakeside Rescue Trust Agreement, the rescue ledger, Thomas Reed's journal, the missing harbor file records, and photographs of the sunken boat and the strongbox beneath the old North Dock. Richard Dalton sat near the opposite table with two attorneys, his face calm but tight around the eyes. The hearing began with Sheriff Ben explaining how Noah had bought the abandoned shoreline parcel, built his shelter, spotted the sunken boat, recovered Thomas Reed's waterproof box, and followed the evidence to the old dock. Lily then presented the missing file sequence from the county archive, showing how references to the rescue trust remained while the original documents had disappeared. She read aloud the central clause from the recovered agreement, stating that the shoreline, rescue dock, emergency shelters, and public access were permanently protected for community rescue purposes and could not be transferred into private ownership or closed for commercial development. Walter testified next. He spoke of Thomas Reed rowing into storms without asking for payment, of lanterns kept burning near the old rescue station, and of volunteers leaving blankets, oars, ropes, and food for whoever might need them next. His voice shook only once, when he described the lake before the trust was forgotten. "We used to believe every person on that water was our responsibility," he said. Others followed. An elderly woman showed the photograph of her brother wrapped in Thomas's blanket. A retired teacher described the two boys Thomas brought back from rough water. A man held up the old oar marked LRT and said his grandfather had carved those letters after helping repair the rescue boat. Each memory matched the rescue ledger page by page. Richard's attorney argued that the county auction had been valid according to available records, and that old agreements could not easily overturn modern development plans. Ben responded by placing the original signed trust document and county recording seals before the commissioners. Lily added the correspondence ledger proving Thomas had filed renewal papers and rescue inventories before the documents disappeared. The room fell quiet when one commissioner asked Richard whether Dalton Lakeside Development had known about rumors of the trust before trying to buy Noah's parcel. Richard hesitated. "There were old stories," he said at last. "Nothing we considered legally reliable, but reliable enough to ask a 15-year-old whether he found anything inside a sunken boat." Noah said quietly. The words drew a murmur through the room. Richard looked away first. After a long private review, the commissioners returned with their decision. The Lakeside Rescue Trust had never been legally dissolved. The county's auction of the protected shoreline had been conducted in error because of incomplete records. Noah's $50 purchase would be refunded, and the shoreline, old rescue dock, emergency shelter site, and public access would be restored to the trust. The county would appoint a board to reopen the rescue property according to Thomas Reed's original purpose. Applause filled the room, not loud at first, then rising until Walter wiped his eyes and Lily smiled through tears. Noah expected to feel loss, but instead he felt the same calm he had first found beside the water. The land had never stopped being a shelter. It had simply needed someone to bring the truth back to shore. Richard left without speaking to him. That evening, Noah returned to the lake with Walter. The old boat rested beside the repaired dock, its wood dark in the sunset. Noah sat near his small shelter, took Thomas Reed's sealed envelope from his backpack, and broke the wax marked "To the one who brings the boat back." Noah unfolded Thomas Reed's final letter beside the small fire he had built near the shelter. While the lake turned silver under the last light of evening, Walter Hayes sat a few feet away on an overturned crate, quiet enough to let the words belong to Noah first. The handwriting inside was careful, though shakier than the early pages of the journal. "To the one who brings the boat back," Thomas had written. "If this letter has reached your hands, then the lake has not forgotten how to return what people tried to bury. Noah swallowed hard and kept reading. Thomas wrote that a lake could look peaceful from shore, but anyone who had been caught in sudden wind knew how quickly still water became danger. That was why the rescue trust had mattered, not because of papers, boards, or legal lines, but because every person who entered the water carried a life someone loved. He wrote of cold nights rowing toward cries in the dark, of strangers wrapped in blankets, of children returned shivering to parents who had nearly lost them. He never called himself brave. He called himself available. Near the end, one sentence had been underlined. A shelter is not built by walls, but by the promise that whoever arrives cold, frightened, or alone will not be turned away. Noah lowered the page and looked at the lean-to he had built with salvaged boards and a torn tarp when he had nowhere else to sleep. He had thought he was building a hiding place. Thomas had left him the meaning of a shelter. The county moved quickly after the hearing. Noah's $50 was refunded, but he kept only $8, the same amount he had once had after buying the shoreline, and donated the rest back to the Lakeside Rescue Trust. Walter laughed when he heard, then wiped his eyes and pretended dust had blown in from the road. Sheriff Ben Foster helped the new trust board secure the restored shoreline, while Lily Morgan preserved the rescue ledger, the journal, the original agreement, and the documents from beneath the dock in the county archive. Copies were placed inside a weatherproof case near the lake so anyone could read how the trust had begun. The community returned not all at once, but steadily. Fishermen rebuilt the dock with stronger posts. A retired carpenter framed a proper shelter where Noah's lean-to had stood. Families brought blankets, lanterns, life jackets, rope, first aid supplies, canned food, and spare clothes. Children painted small blue signs marked LRT for the rescue path. Walter worked every day his knees allowed, teaching Noah how to sand old boards smooth, repair oars, patch a boat seam, and coil rope so it would run free in an emergency. When the board asked Noah to become the first caretaker of the restored shelter, he looked at Sheriff Ben in disbelief. "I'm 15, he said. Ben nodded. "And you found what adults missed." Lily smiled. "You also know what it means to need a safe place." Noah accepted quietly. He did not pretend he was ready for everything, but he understood the promise well enough to begin. By early autumn, the lakeside shelter stood finished beneath the pines. It was small, sturdy, and warm, with a wood stove, dry shelves, emergency supplies, and a bunk for anyone stranded by weather. The raised boat was repaired enough to rest beside the dock as a memorial, not hidden underwater anymore. Thomas's name was carved into a simple wooden plaque near the entrance, along with the names from the rescue ledger. Richard Dalton never returned to the shoreline, but his company withdrew its development claim after the hearing and quietly sent a shipment of life jackets through the county office. Noah accepted them because useful things should not be wasted. The first person to use the restored shelter was a young father whose canoe overturned during a sudden storm. Noah and Walter spotted him clinging to a branch near the reeds and helped pull him to shore with rope from the new dock. The man was shaking too hard to speak at first. Noah wrapped him in a blanket, gave him hot soup, and sat nearby until his breathing steadied. When the man finally whispered, "I don't know how to thank you," Noah looked toward Thomas's repaired boat and answered the way the trust had taught him. "Leave something for the next person when you can." Months later, the county held a small dedication beside the water. Lily read from Thomas's journal, Sheriff Ben explained the restored trust. Walter stood beside Noah with one hand on his shoulder as the crowd gathered around the new sign Noah had painted himself. It stood at the entrance to the shelter path, facing the road and the lake at once. If the lake brings you here, you already belong. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then applause moved softly through the crowd, warm and steady. Noah thought of the screen door locking behind him, the cold nights beneath abandoned docks, the laughter when he bought a shoreline everyone called worthless, and the dark shape of the boat waiting beneath clear water. He had lost the land as a possession, but gained something larger than ownership. He had gained a place in a promise. That evening, after the last visitors left, Noah stood alone on the repaired dock. The lake was calm, reflecting the first stars. Behind him, the shelter window glowed with a small golden light. Walter had gone home. Lily had taken the final copies back to the archive, and Sheriff Ben had promised to check in the next morning. Noah rang the little rescue bell once, softly, not as a warning, but as a thank you. The sound crossed the water and faded into the trees. Then he stepped back toward the shelter. No longer the boy with nowhere to go, but the guardian of a place that would never again turn away someone cold, frightened, or alone.